A signal moved across the silent void of space, and no one on Earth noticed it at first. It was faint and strange, buried in the background noise of the universe, like a whisper in a storm. But machines listening high above the planet caught it and recorded it. Men and women in quiet rooms studied the sound at first with confusion and then with growing dread, because the pattern was not natural. It was organized, it was deliberate, it was a voice that did not come from Earth. The message was short. Just a single phrase in translation: "Your world is known, your time has come," but it was enough to change the lives of every human being who would soon hear of it. The scientists stared at one another. Pale and speechless governments were alerted. Generals pulled out dusty folders, marked with plans that had never been used before. Contingency plans for contact. While politicians whispered behind closed doors, the signal kept coming, always the same short phrase. No threats, no offers, no demands. Only the heavy weight of being noticed in the dark ocean of stars. On the other side of the message, hidden beyond the edge of the solar system, something vast moved, a ship larger than any city on Earth, a vessel of the Galactic Empire. Its surface burned with blue lights and silver armor. Its engines shook the dark with power older than humanity itself. It had crossed the gulfs between stars in days, not centuries, and now it slowed its approach toward the small blue planet it had found. The crew of that ship were not nervous for them. This was routine. The Empire had absorbed 1,000 worlds and crushed 100 rebellions before most species reacted in the same ways. Fear, surrender, sometimes foolish pride and violence, but always. It ended the same. The Empire endured and grew, yet something unsettled them, though none would admit it aloud. They had watched Earth from afar before they came. They had seen strange things in human broadcasts: laughter beside violence, songs of love beside images of war. They had studied human history and saw endless cycles of destruction and survival. No species should have lived through so much fire, but somehow humans did, and still they climbed higher. The envoy aboard the ship adjusted the robe of state as he prepared to speak to the leaders of Earth. He practiced the words of power, words meant to remind new worlds of their smallness in the face of the Empire. But in his heart, he wondered, would these humans tremble? Would they beg on? Earth. The meeting was arranged quickly, faster than anyone thought possible. Nations that had fought for centuries agreed to sit at the same table. There were no arguments, no long debates. The world seemed to understand at once that nothing else mattered anymore, not wealth, not borders, not ancient grudges, only survival. When the Empire ship entered orbit, the skies burned with fire as its engines slowed. Every camera on Earth turned upward, and billions of human eyes saw a shadow blot out the stars. The Empire expected panic, streets full of screaming people, the sound of terror. But they were met instead with a silence unlike anything they had imagined. People stood outside staring upward. No one moved, no one shouted, no one ran, only a quiet faces filled with thought. The envoy was puzzled, but continued with his role. A transmission was sent to Earth, and leaders gathered in a hidden chamber deep below ground, where the reply would be broadcast. They were tired, their faces lined with worry. But when the alien voice echoed through the chamber in perfect translation, they did not collapse in fear. They did not shout back. They listened. The envoy spoke with all the authority of the Empire. "You are now within the domain of the stars. You will submit and you will serve. Resistance is not survival. Resistance is extinction. Your place is decided." There was a pause. The envoy waited for a human voice to cry out, or for whispers of surrender, but the silence stretched on for long. Seconds then, one of the humans leaned forward, pressed a button on the console, and answered, "We acknowledge your presence. Nothing more." The line went dead. The envoy blinked, confused. The words repeated in his mind over and over. "Acknowledge your presence." Not fear, not surrender, not even anger, only calm recognition. The silence after was worse than any threat. On the surface of Earth, people waited for news. No one shouted or screamed. There was no frenzy of fear. Families sat together staring at glowing screens, waiting for words from their leaders, but nothing came. No speeches of panic, no loud calls for defiance, only quiet waiting, as if the entire planet had agreed to hold its breath at the same time. The Empire ship sent more messages, but the replies were the same: brief, calm, and silent. The humans asked simple questions. Where are you from? What is the extent of your empire? What is your intent? The voices were measured, the tone, even. It was as if the humans were interviewing the invaders, rather than begging for their lives. Inside the Empire ship, unease began to grow. One officer whispered to another, "They do not act like the others. They are too calm, too quiet." The envoy dismissed it at first, but in the quiet of his chamber he felt the chill of something he had never felt before. He was not sure if the humans feared them at all. Reports flowed back to the capital of the Empire, and the Council of the Stars debated in hushed tones. Some said humanity was too primitive to be a threat, but others pointed to the strange silence that came from Earth. Silence could mean calculation. Silence could mean hidden weapons. Silence could mean a will so strong it did not need to shout. On Earth, the people did not know the words spoken. In the halls of the Empire, they only knew the shadow above them remained, and every hour the sense of waiting grew heavier in the quiet rooms of power. Human leaders gathered again. Some wanted to prepare armies, others whispered about peace, but the loudest voices were not the ones that mattered, because the mood of the planet itself was strangely still. A scientist who had first heard the signal spoke softly to the council. "Perhaps we should not speak at all. Perhaps our silence is stronger than any weapon we could raise." The others looked at her uncertain, but none argued. So humanity waited in silence, and the Empire waited in unease. Two civilizations staring at one another across the void, neither moving, neither shouting, only the heavy and presence of quiet. And somewhere deep within the Empire ship, the envoy looked down at Earth and whispered to himself, "They should be afraid. Why are they not afraid?" The stars outside seemed to listen, the silence of humanity spreading outward like a shadow darker than war. And though no battle had been fought, not a single weapon fired, the first contact between humanity and the Galactic Empire had already left the galaxy trembling. The story was only beginning, but already the silence of Earth had shaken the stars. The ship of the Galactic Empire drifted in silent orbit above Earth, a mountain of steel and fire against the black of space below. The blue planet turned slowly, covered in clouds and oceans, and the pale lights of cities at night. The people of Earth stared upward, still waiting, still silent. The envoy paced inside his chamber, his long cloak trailing behind him. He had delivered the message of the Empire as he had done many times before. His words were the words of dominance, his tone sharp and commanding. Usually the new worlds trembled. They begged, they argued, or they struck out with foolish violence. But this time the humans had said almost nothing. A few short sentences spoken without emotion, then only silence again. The envoy had expected panic and chaos. He had expected desperate pleas, but instead he had been given calm acceptance. No shouting, no fear, not even anger. Only a steady voice that refused to bend. He felt a deep unease in his chest, though he could not explain why. Across the Empire ship, officers spoke in whispers when they thought no one listened. They too had seen the strange silence of humanity. One asked, "What if the silence means they are stronger than they look?" Another shook his head. "No, they are young, they are weak, their ships are slow, their weapons are primitive." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. On Earth, leaders met again in their hidden chambers, their faces pale with lack of sleep, their eyes fixed on the glowing screens that showed the alien vessel circling above them. The Empire's messages kept coming, words of warning, words of power, but still the leaders answered with only calm replies, questions asked without fear. What is the size of your empire? How? Many worlds do you control? What is your purpose? The aliens grew impatient. The envoy demanded to know why humans refused to kneel. But the human answers never changed. They acknowledged the presence of the Empire. They asked their quiet questions. Then they ended the transmission. Never once did they raise their voices. Among the people of Earth, silence spread like a strange fever. There were no riots, no mass panic. Only crowded streets where millions stood staring upward, hands clasped together. Voices hushed, children asking parents, "Why is it so quiet?" The parents had no answer, only silence in return. The envoy sent reports to the capital of the Empire, his words sharp but uncertain. "The humans are not reacting as expected," he wrote. "They show no fear, no desperation. They answer only with silence and questions. I cannot read their intent." In the great council of the Empire, debate broke out. Some lords laughed at the idea of humans as a threat. "They are fragile," they said. "They have only just begun to travel between planets. They are no more dangerous than the hundreds of species we have conquered before." But others were not so sure. Silence can mean waiting. Silence can mean strength. One old strategist leaned forward and spoke quietly. His voice carried across the chamber. "These humans remind me of the Trailith. Do you remember them 1,000 years ago? They too were silent, we believed. Them weak, we were wrong. They fought until the stars burned, and only when we erased their home did the silence end." The council grew uneasy, but pride smothered their doubt. Back on Earth, strange things were happening in the shadows. Militaries quietly moved, but no armies marched openly. Satellites shifted in orbit. Systems long-kept secret came alive, but there was no grand announcement, no speeches of resistance. Humanity prepared in quiet. The world seemed to breathe as one, all noise swallowed by an invisible weight. The envoy requested another audience with human leaders. His voice was louder this time, filled with forced strength. "You are standing against the greatest power in the galaxy. Do you understand what you risk? Your silence is not wisdom, it is foolishness. Speak now, submit now, before you bring destruction upon yourselves." The humans sat still, their faces unreadable. One leaned close to the microphone and answered slowly, "We understand the risk. We acknowledge your presence. We will not kneel." The envoy clenched his hands together, his voice nearly breaking with frustration. "Then what do you intend? What is your plan?" There was a pause long enough to fill the chamber with dread. Then the human answered, "We intend to listen. We intend to learn." And again, silence. The envoy left the chamber shaken outside. His officers waited for orders, but he gave none. He stared down at the planet below and wondered for the first time in his career whether he faced something he could not understand on Earth. Ordinary people began to sense the strangeness of their own calm. They gathered in silence on rooftops, in open fields, in city streets. Some whispered prayers, some stood hand in hand. No loud protests, no parades of war, only a quiet resolve that seemed to rise from the ground itself. A soldier stationed in a secret base looked at his commander and asked, "Why are we not fighting? Why are we not shouting?" And the commander only answered, "Because silence is stronger than noise." Right now in the Empire ship, an argument erupted among the crew. Younger officers demanded immediate action. They said humans must be crushed before their silence spread fear across the stars. But the older ones hesitated. One muttered, "I fear we have already lost something without firing a single shot." Messages from other worlds began arriving in the Council of the Empire. Reports that smaller species had seen the broadcasts of humanity and felt inspired whispers spread across the galaxy of a world that looked into the face of the Empire and did not scream. The envoy's final report that night was brief and cold. The humans remain calm, they are silent, they refuse to kneel. I do not know if this silence hides fear or hides strength as darkness fell across the planet Earth. The people still stared at the shadow in the sky, and the shadow stared back. No words, no battles, no fire, only silence stretching across the void, growing heavier with every hour, and in that silence the seeds of dread began to bloom inside the heart of the Empire. The records of Earth lay spread across glowing screens in the command chamber of the Empire, ship files upon files drawn from captured transmissions, from human satellites, from broadcasts pulled from the air, and from ancient records scraped from their networks. At first the officers studied them with the usual detached interest, the way they had studied hundreds of other species before humans. They thought would be simple, just another young race to add to the long list of conquered peoples, but the deeper they read, the more uneasy they became. The envoy stood at the center of the chamber, his hands behind his back, his eyes moving across the human history displayed before him. Battles carved into the surface of the earth, war upon war, names of conflicts stretching farther than the mind could easily hold every century. Another rise, another fall, another age of blood and destruction. One officer whispered, "They destroy themselves. Again and again and again, but they always return." The screen showed the great world wars, mushroom clouds climbing into the sky, cities turned into ash, yet from the ash humans built again. The screen showed burning ships at sea and planes falling from the sky, yet the humans never ceased to fight. The screen showed revolutions and rebellions, tearing nations apart, and still the humans endured. One officer muttered, "This is not possible, a species that tears itself apart. This often should have been extinct long ago." The envoy narrowed his eyes. "They do not simply endure, they grow each time each war leaves them stronger. The weapons, sharper, the machines, faster. Their endurance is unnatural." Far below on the surface of Earth, the people knew nothing of the exact debates aboard the ship, but the silence among them deepened. Governments met behind closed doors, but their words were calm, even when fear tried to slip into their hearts. The strange stillness of humanity held firm a scientist. Working in a hidden base, scrolled through ancient archives of her own. She looked at photos of ruined cities rebuilt into shining towers. She whispered to her colleagues, "This is why they are afraid of us, not because of our weapons, but because we never stay down." In the Empire capital, the council had gathered to examine the envoy's reports. The chamber was filled with towering figures, cloaked in gold and silver. Their voices echoed against the walls of crystal. One read aloud from the report. "Humans fight endlessly against themselves, yet do not fall. Humans suffer disasters, yet rise again. Humans endure." A lord of the council scoffed, "Endurance is not strength. Endurance is desperation. They are nothing but stubborn animals." But another voice rose, calm and sharp. "Stubborn animals who survive every trial are dangerous. They may not match our weapons now, but given time they will." The debate raged into the night, pride and fear clashing in equal measure. But far above Earth, the envoy felt the decision already forming in his mind. He could not shake the images of human wars, cities burning and rebuilt, soldiers marching again after defeat, faces hollow yet determined. He whispered to himself, "They are not afraid of us, because they have already faced worse on Earth." The people felt the weight of history too. Though they could not see the records the Empire studied in their own way, they carried memory in their bones. Children asked their parents, "Why is the world so quiet?" The parents answered, "Because this moment is not new. We have faced shadows before and survived." One officer aboard the Empire ship tried to dismiss the unease. "They are chaotic, they are unpredictable, they kill one another without end. This makes them weak." But another replied, "No, it makes them dangerous. They are practiced in suffering. They are trained in survival." The envoy called for another transmission with Earth. This time, his words were careful, chosen with less fire than before. He asked humanity, why? Do you not resist? Why do you not surrender? Why are you so calm? The reply was long delayed. The humans seemed to consider every syllable before answering at last. A calm voice came across the speakers. We have known fear for thousands of years. Your presence does not change that. We have seen destruction. We have seen death. We have seen war. We are calm because we have already lived through worse. The envoy felt his throat tighten. The officers exchanged nervous glances. It was the first time the humans had said more than a sentence, and their words cut deeper than threats could have. Silence followed again, heavier than before. In the villages and cities of Earth, people gathered to watch the skies and listen to rumors. But even as fear crept into their hearts, they remembered the long stories of survival told by their grandparents. They remembered how humanity had walked through fire before and still stood. Many whispered to each other, if we survived our own wars, we can survive this. Empire ships historians continued to dig deeper. They found images of vast armies marching across continents, fleets of iron ships hammering one another in oceans, skies filled with aircraft, striking with thunder and fire. The more they uncovered, the more their fear grew. These were not battles between empires among the stars. These were wars fought on a single world by a single species, and yet they matched the scale of galactic campaigns. The envoy called again to the council. This time, his voice betrayed his unease. These humans are not to be measured by the age of their ships or the number of their planets. They are to be measured by their history, and by that measure they are stronger than any I have seen. The council dismissed him with cold laughter. But when his image faded, several lords remained in silence, unable to shake the thought. On Earth, a strange unity began to grow between nations that once stood apart. Old enemies spoke with quiet voices across tables no one raised. Their voices, no one struck the table. All understood the truth. The stars were watching, and silence was stronger than shouting. The envoy could not sleep. His thoughts filled with human images, endless lines of graves, cities reduced to rubble, rebuilt. Again, soldiers wounded, carried from battlefields only to return again. He realized with horror, the humans do not simply endure. They adapt. Every wound becomes a lesson. Every disaster becomes a step forward. The officers of the ship began to argue. Openly, some demanded immediate conquest before the humans grew stronger. Others warned that such action could awaken a storm unlike any they had ever faced. One muttered, they are not loud, because they are not afraid. They are quiet, because they are preparing. The silence between Earth and the Empire ship stretched longer each day. Transmissions came slower. Fewer words were exchanged, yet the silence itself spoke louder than any declaration. The humans waited. The Empire hesitated, and the galaxy whispered. Far away in the darkness of space, other civilizations tuned their receivers to the signals from Earth. They, too, heard the calm voice of humanity and the heavy silence that followed. Some trembled in fear. Others felt hope, a species that could look into the face of the Empire and not scream could change everything. The envoy sent one last report before the sun rose over Earth. The humans frighten me. Not with their weapons, not with their technology, but with their history. They have fallen 1,000 times and risen 1,000 more. If we crush them now, they will rise again. If we leave them alone, they will rise stronger. We cannot stop them. We can only delay them. And as the dawn spread across Earth, ordinary people stepped outside to stare at the vast shadow in the sky. They did not cry out. They did not flee. They stood in silence, and in that silence there was no weakness, only strength. A strength the Empire was beginning to understand, a strength that came not from noise, but from survival itself. The stars themselves seemed to shiver as the truth spread. The silence of humanity was not emptiness, it was memory, and that memory was far more terrifying than war. The Council of the Empire decided that silence must be broken. They believed fear would return once the humans saw the true strength of the stars, so they prepared a display unlike any other fleets moved through space. In great waves, silver hulls, glittering engines, blazing weapons, shining with power. Enough to burn worlds. 1,000 ships gathered in orbit above Earth, each one a symbol of the Empire's rule. From the surface, the people of Earth saw the sky fill with moving lights. Whole constellations vanished behind walls of steel. Children pointed. Upward, adults stared with steady eyes. News channels broadcast the images again and again, ships stretching across the heavens like a second horizon. Yet still the world did not scream. No armies rushed to the streets, no leaders shouted fiery speeches. Only a strange silence that wrapped around every city and every home. Inside the Empire ship, the envoy gave his orders. The humans will watch. They will see our firepower. They will hear the thunder of our fleets, and their silence will break. It must. Break. No species can look upon the full strength of the Empire and remain calm. He believed his own words. Yet somewhere deep within, he remembered the reports of human history, and unease crawled in his chest. The display began. Weapons charged there. Glow turning night into day. Beams of energy cut through the darkness in perfect formation. Missiles launched into empty space, detonating in bursts of light that shook the heavens. The fleets moved as one, a grand storm of fire and metal choreographed, to intimidate every living being on Earth. On the surface, the ground trembled as the sky lit up. People gathered in open squares, their faces bright in the glow. Some held hands, some stood alone, but none ran, none screamed. They simply watched, as if the greatest armada in history was nothing more than a storm on the horizon, in a bunker deep below ground. Human leaders watched as well, screens filled with images of fleets stretching into infinity. Some leaned forward, waiting for the sound of threats or ultimatums, but no threats came, only the display above. Then the envoy's voice filled the chamber. "You see our strength, you see our endless power. Now speak. What do you say before the Empire of Stars?" For long minutes there was no reply. Only the humming of machines and the quiet breathing of men and women staring at the screen. The envoy waited, expecting a crack in the calm, expecting cries of fear. At last, a human pressed the button, leaned into the microphone and spoke with the same voice as before, measured, steady, almost cold. "Is this all you have?" The words carried across space like a blade, cutting through air. Every officer in the Empire ship froze. The envoy felt his heart stumble in his chest. He had expected anger or surrender, but not this. Not the quiet dismissal of everything they had shown. The fleets hung in silence, weapons still glowing. But for the first time, commanders hesitated. What had once been a performance of dominance now felt like a performance. Judged and found lacking by the very prey they wished to control on Earth, the silence deepened. People turned from the sky back to one another, and their calm spread like a wave. A child whispered to her mother, "They cannot scare us," the mother only nodded because it was true. The envoy tried again, his voice louder, trembling with forced rage. "You misunderstand. This is not all we have. This is but a fraction of our power. We command more than you can imagine. We can end your world with a single command." His voice echoed with desperation more than pride. The humans gave no answer. The line cut again. Silence returned, heavier than thunder. In the command chamber of the flagship, officers argued. Some demanded immediate action. Crush them now, before. Their calm spreads to others, but others shook their heads. "No, they are baiting us. They want us to strike. They are not afraid. Why are they not afraid?" The envoy closed his eyes, replaying the single human sentence again and again. "Is this all you have?" He realized with horror that the words did not sound like arrogance. They sounded like truth. The news spread across the galaxy, faster than light, carried by whispers and intercepted transmissions. Dozens of worlds watched the recording of the greatest. Fleet in the Empire performing above Earth, and the humans answering with only 5 words. Is this all you have? Oppressed species whispered of resistance. Rulers feared the silence that had begun to echo beyond one planet, on Earth. The people went about their lives quietly but differently than before. The shadow of the fleets remained, yet no one bowed to it. Markets opened, children went to school, workers returned to factories and fields, as if the sky above no longer mattered. Silence wrapped itself around humanity, like armor. The envoy ordered the fleets to disperse, fearing the longer they hovered, the weaker the Empire looked. The display of power that should have crushed human spirit had instead exposed cracks in the Empire's image that night. Alone in his chamber, the envoy stared at Earth, the blue glow of oceans and the soft spark of cities against the dark. He whispered to himself, "They are not like the others. They are not afraid, because fear is already behind them." The officers kept their distance now. Some looked at the envoy with quiet blame, others with silent fear. None wanted to admit the truth aloud, but all felt it inside. The silence of humanity was not breaking, it was spreading, and the Empire had no answer in a quiet. Home on Earth, a family sat together in the dark. They looked at the sky where the fleets had burned hours earlier. The father spoke softly. "They thought they could scare us, but we have seen fire before." The mother nodded. The child whispered, "We will not scream." And in the deep halls of the Empire Council, the lords shouted at one another over the failure of the display. But when the shouting ended, silence fell, and none dared speak of what they truly feared, that a single calm question from humanity had shaken the stars more than all their fleets combined. "Is this all you have?" Those words lingered in the minds of emperors and soldiers, of slaves and rulers, of all who heard them, and the galaxy understood at last. The silence of humanity was not weakness, it was strength, and the Empire would never forget it. The Council of the Empire was restless. Their grand display above Earth had failed to bring the reaction they wanted. The humans had not screamed, they had not begged, they had not even flinched. Instead, they had answered with 5 words that still echoed through the chambers of power. "Is this all you have?" Those words stung like poison in the hearts of the proud rulers. So the decision was made: humanity must be tested by force. Silence must be broken with fire. A fleet was chosen smaller than the Grand Armada, yet strong enough to erase a dozen worlds. A demonstration fleet of warships, cruisers and carriers, armed with the most precise weapons the Empire had forged. They were ordered to move toward Earth with one mission: to remind the humans what fear truly meant. The envoy did not agree, but he had no choice. He watched as the fleet prepared, engines roaring into the void. He thought of the human calm, the steady voices, the silence that clung like armor. He wondered if this test would reveal weakness or something far worse on Earth. The people saw the movement above their skies, a new group of ships descending lower, heavier. Armed, the world held its breath. But still, no one panicked. No one rioted. Instead, the silence grew deeper. Leaders met again in their underground chambers, their voices steady, their eyes fixed on the glowing displays of alien fleets approaching. A general spoke. "They are preparing to strike. They want to break us. We must be ready." Another leader nodded. "Already we are ready." The general frowned. "Our armies are small, our fleets weaker, our weapons simple. How can we resist?" The leader only replied, "Not with armies, not with fleets, with patience." And silence? Above Earth, the Empire fleet spread out like a net, their weapons armed but not fired. They believed they held the power to crush the world below with a single order. Yet, as they moved closer, their ships began to falter. Screens flickered. Commands delayed, navigation slowed. It was subtle at first, then sharper, more chaotic. In hidden rooms across Earth, scientists and engineers worked with cold, focused satellites. Long thought dead suddenly came alive, systems buried deep under oceans. And mountains began to hum with quiet energy. Humanity had never spoken of these things to the Empire. They had remained silent as their networks prepared. One by one, the Empire ships lost control of their targeting systems. Lights blinked weapons. Froze guidance systems failed. Commanders shouted orders, but their voices echoed into dead circuits. The fleet that was meant to terrify now stumbled blind in orbit above the blue planet. From the surface, humans watched the strange dance of alien ships drifting without direction, their silence never broken. A calm voice from Earth reached out at last across the void. Leave or stay. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they struck. The Empire fleet harder than any weapon. Inside the flagship, the commander of the demonstration fleet felt sweat across his skin. He turned to the envoy, who only stared silently at the planet below. "What have they done?" The commander demanded. "They have done nothing," the envoy whispered. "They only watched us destroy ourselves." The humans had not fired a single shot. They had not launched a single missile, yet the fleet of the Empire was helpless, orbiting blind above the planet. The silence of Earth pressing upon them like a storm. In the homes and cities of Earth, people whispered the words, "Leave or stay." They were repeated on every street, every broadcast, every quiet conversation. The world seemed to speak as one. The choice given to the Empire was simple, yet unbearable. The commander of the fleet argued, "We cannot retreat, it will shame the Empire." But the officers around him looked at one another, fear in their eyes for the first time. Many thought of the endless human wars they had. Studied, they thought of the calm voice that carried no fear. They thought of the silence that smothered every word. The envoy sent a private message to the council in the capital. "Humanity has shown us their weapon. It is not fire or steel, it is patience. And silence they can unmake us without lifting a hand." The council raged at his words. Some demanded the fleet strike with brute force to wipe away the shame. Others warned that such an act might open a war the Empire could not contain. For every world was watching, every oppressed people, listening to the silence of Earth and finding hope in it. On Earth, leaders stood again in their chamber screens, lit with images of alien ships drifting helplessly. One asked, "Should we strike now? Should we end them?" Another shook his head. "No, if we strike, we are like them. Our silence is enough." So Earth remained silent, the ships above remained blind, and the galaxy held its breath. Hours stretched into days, the Empire fleet unable to recover, unable to strike. Their threat dissolved into humiliation. At last, the commander of the fleet made the only choice left. Engines roared as the ships turned and began to retreat one by one, leaving Earth behind, the silence of humanity still unbroken on the ground. People watched as the lights in the sky grew smaller until they were gone. No cheer, no shout of victory, only quiet nods between neighbors, quiet smiles between families, children asking, "Did we win?" and parents answering, "No, we simply endured." The envoy sat in his chamber staring at the reports of failure, his hands trembling. He whispered to himself, "They gave us a choice, leave or stay, and we could not even stay without fear." The retreating fleet limped back toward the capital, carrying with it shame and silence. The council received the reports with fury, but also with a new fear. Deep inside, they knew the truth. Humanity had not fought, and yet humanity had won. Across the galaxy, whispers spread faster than ships could travel, stories of Earth. A world that faced the Empire and did not scream, a people who stood silent and made the strongest fleet retreat. Oppressed worlds began to whisper too. If humans can stand in silence, perhaps we can too. On Earth, life returned to its rhythm, but the silence lingered stronger than ever. The people knew the Empire would return, perhaps with more fire, perhaps with more fury, but they also knew something else, deep and unshakable. Silence had become their greatest weapon, and the stars themselves had begun to tremble before it. The retreat of the demonstration fleet spread like fire through the Empire's networks. The ships had been sent to terrify Earth, to break the silence of humanity. Instead, they had left humiliated, their weapons frozen, their systems blind, their pride shattered. The Council of the Empire raged. Some called for the commanders to be executed. Others demanded the envoy be stripped of rank. But beneath all the anger was something deeper, something none wished to name: fear. The Empire had crushed countless civilizations without effort. They had shown their fleets and their fire, and every species had bent or been burned. Yet humanity had not bent and had not burned. They had watched in silence as the fleet collapsed. Upon itself then, they had offered only 4 words: leave or stay. The fleet had left, and the Empire could not erase the shame. In the homes of the capital worlds, people whispered of the humans, a young race that had stood before the greatest power. Of the galaxy without fear, merchants in hidden markets repeated the story again and again. Slaves in mines passed the tale in quiet voices. Rebels on distant moons painted symbols of silence on their walls. The calm of Earth was becoming a storm. The Council could not allow it. Their pride demanded blood. Their fear demanded control. So the decision was made: humanity would not only be tested, it would be broken. Once and for all, war was declared. The envoy heard the decree in silence. He did not argue, for he knew words would not be heard. His reports warning of human endurance, of human patience, of human silence had been dismissed again and again. The Council believed that fire would do what silence could not. So fleets were summoned from across the stars. Thousands of ships, more than had ever been gathered for a single war. The Empire moved to strike on Earth. The news came like a shadow, spreading across every nation. Satellites intercepted transmissions. Hidden networks confirmed the truth. The Empire was preparing for full war. Leaders gathered again in their underground chambers, their faces grim yet steady. One spoke softly: "The war we wished to avoid has come." Another asked, "What shall we do? Do we surrender? Do we fight?" The answer came not with shouting, but with calm voices: "We will not start this war, but we will end it." The world did not panic. Factories worked in silence. Satellites shifted quietly into new orbits. Bases hidden under mountains stirred to life. Engineers spoke in hushed voices as systems long kept secret awoke. Ordinary people went about their days, calm but watchful. They looked at the sky and knew war was coming. Yet no one screamed. The silence remained. Above the planet, scouts of the Empire arrived. First small ships moving in formation, watching, waiting, reporting back. They expected to see chaos below, fires and riots. But instead, they saw calm cities glowing steadily, people moving through streets, markets open, schools filled with children. It unsettled them more than any weapon could have. Soon the horizon of space was filled with shadows as the fleets of the Empire poured into the solar system. Their numbers so vast, they blotted out constellations from the night sky on Earth. Billions looked upward and saw darkness spreading across the heavens. The Council believed this sight alone would break humanity's silence, yet still the world did not scream. The envoy stood aboard the flagship, his eyes heavy. He knew what was about to begin. He also knew something the Council refused to admit. Silence had power greater than all their fleets. The first command was given. Strike. Energy flared from the ships. Missiles burned through the void. Beams of light slashed downward, targeting human satellites, bases, defenses. But as before, something strange happened. Systems failed. Commands vanished. Weapons blinked out one by one. The fleet staggered as though the void itself resisted them. Confusion spread. Shouts filled the channels, but the humans remained silent. Then for the first time, humanity answered, not with noise, not with fury, but with precision. Satellites fired beams guided by cold calculation bases, released weapons designed not to terrify, but to dismantle human fleets, rose from hidden hangars, moving with deliberate patience. They did not roar into battle. They moved like shadows, cutting through the darkness. The Empire expected chaos. Instead, they found order. Every human strike was measured, every move, quiet, surgical. Fleets that had burned across the stars for centuries now stumbled as if fighting an invisible storm. The envoy watched in awe, his heart sinking. Humanity was not only resisting, they were dismantling the empire piece by piece. On Earth, people watched. The first images of battle screens glowing with fire in the sky, yet still there were no riots, no wild celebrations. The silence held. A child asked her father, "Are we winning?" The father whispered, "No, child, we are surviving." The war raged for days. Fleets clashed in orbit around moons, weapons tore through the black, but humanity never shouted their voices on the channels, calm, precise. Never more than a few words, targets, given instructions, shared silence between every syllable the empire raged with. Noise filling the void with commands, threats, and panic. The humans answered only with quiet. The council demanded victory, no matter the cost. More fleets were sent, reinforcements poured in. But the more ships they threw into the fire, the more the silence of humanity spread. Commanders began to hesitate. Soldiers began to whisper, what if they cannot be broken? What if silence is stronger than fear? On one battlefield above Mars, the Empire launched a final furious push, thousands of ships burning toward human lines, but humanity moved like a storm without thunder, one strike at a time, cutting supply lines, dismantling command ships until the grand push dissolved into fragments, the silence of Earth guiding every move. The envoy stood watching the collapse of yet another assault, his voice soft as he spoke to no one. They do not shout before the storm. They do not rage like us. They are the storm itself, quiet, unstoppable. The news reached every corner of the galaxy. The Empire had declared war, but humanity had answered with silence, and that silence was winning. Oppressed peoples lifted their heads for the first time in generations. Rebels painted walls, not with fire, but with a single word: silence. The council met again, their voices raised in anger, yet none could hide the fear in their eyes. One asked, "How can they fight without fury?" Another answered, "They have already lived through fury. They have no need for it. They have only silence." And on Earth, the people continued their lives, factories running, farmers tending fields, children learning in schools, all beneath a sky filled with war. The silence never broken, the calm never shattered, for they knew the truth. The Empire had declared war, but humanity would end it, and their silence would echo longer than any fire. The galaxy trembled as the war spread, and the silence of humanity grew heavier with each passing day. The war had begun in fire, but now it burned in silence across the stars. The Empire unleashed fleet after fleet, each one greater than the last. Yet each time they met the same enemy, not armies screaming in rage, not soldiers crying out with war songs, but humanity calm, precise, relentless. The silence of Earth followed them into every battle, and the silence terrified them more than the guns. In the orbit of Jupiter, the Empire tried again. Thousands of ships formed into walls of steel and flame, their commanders shouting orders, their weapons firing without pause. They believed no world, no species could stand against such force. But humanity answered, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Ships slid from the shadows of the moon's sleek vessels that had hidden in silence. Their weapons fired not in chaos, but with careful aim, every blast finding its target, every move cutting at the Empire like a blade. The Empire screamed across their channels. Retreat here, advance there, their voices filled with noise, but humanity's voices were few and calm. One commander spoke in a voice steady and quiet. Strike here, cut this line. Silence again, every order delivered without emotion, without fear. It broke the spirit of Empire crews, who heard them, for silence in the middle of fire was worse than thunder. For days, the battle raged, explosions lit the void ships torn apart, debris spinning into the black, but in the end, It was the Empire that withdrew. Their fleets crippled, their pride bleeding. Still humanity did not cheer. Still they did not shout. The people of Earth watched from far below their screens, glowing with images of fire in the skies. Yet no wild joy passed through the cities only. Quiet nods, quiet words we endure. The envoy aboard the flagship of the Empire fleet could no longer deny what he had seen. Humanity did not fight like others. They fought like a storm-slow patient. Unstoppable, every strike measured, every silence heavy. He whispered to himself, "They are not at war with us. They are at war with the very idea of fear." The council demanded answers. They demanded victory reports poured into the capital. Everyone. The same silence on Earth. Silence. In the battles. Silence. On the human channels, one lord of the council shouted, "They do not speak because they are weak." Another replied, "No, they do not speak because they do not need to on." The battlefield's commanders of the Empire began to falter, their crews hearing only calm voices from human ships began to lose their fire. Panic spread through fleets that had once been invincible. A gunner whispered to his captain, "If they are so calm, does it mean they already know we are lost? Above Saturn." Another clash erupted. The Empire sent 500,000 ships to cut through human lines. Humanity sent only a fraction. Yet they moved like shadows, weaving through the chaos, striking at engines, cutting supply routes, leaving whole groups of Empire ships drifting helpless. Their commanders shouted their fear across the void, but humanity never answered, only silence as they moved to the next target. The silence was heavier than death for every soldier of the Empire because it meant their enemy was not desperate. Their enemy was not afraid. Their enemy was certain. Back on Earth, ordinary life continued, factories working, farms growing, children playing. Through the sky above burned with war. The silence spread across every city, across every home when broadcasts showed victories. There was no shouting when losses came. There was no weeping, only quiet resolve. Humanity would not allow noise to break them again. The envoy sat alone, reviewing the images of human history. Again he saw the ruins of cities rebuilt, the endless lines of soldiers marching into fire without breaking. He realized the silence now was not new, it was old. It had been forged in every war of Earth, every fall, every rise. He whispered, "They do not fear us because they have already faced themselves." The Empire's allies began to question their loyalty. Smaller worlds, once obedient, now whispered of breaking away. If humans can stand, perhaps we can too. Silence painted on walls, silence drawn on banners, silence turned into hope across a galaxy long. Drowned in the Empire's noise, the Council grew desperate. They unleashed weapons forbidden for centuries. Storms of plasma meant to scorch entire regions of space. Superweapons designed to end worlds. They fired them into the void above human fleets. But once again, their systems faltered, codes, failing weapons breaking before they struck. Humanity had already reached into their machines and cut the strings without firing a single shot. The superweapons had been silenced. The news spread even faster. The Empire was not only resisted, they were being dismantled without fury, without chaos. The silence of Earth was swallowing their fire. On the moons of Neptune, another confrontation ended the same way. Human fleets, small in number, struck like daggers. The Empire collapsed into retreat. An officer screamed into the channels, "How do they do this? How do they win?" Without shouting. The answer came not from a human, but from one of his own crew, who whispered, "They win because they do not need to shout." On Earth, the people gathered in silence night after night to watch the sky glowing with distant battles. No celebrations, no fireworks, only stillness. A family stood on a balcony. A child asked, "Will they ever stop coming?" The mother held him close and answered, "They will stop when they understand silence is stronger than war." The envoy felt his heart heavy each day. He wrote reports to the Council, warning them yet again, humanity cannot be broken. Their silence is their power. The Council raged and dismissed him again and again, but he knew the truth. The war was already lost, not because Earth had greater fleets, not because Earth had stronger weapons, but because Earth had silence, and silence was spreading faster than any fire could. The galaxy trembled as the silent storm continued, humanity advancing not with noise, but with certainty. One system after another saw the Empire retreat. One battle after another ended the same way humanity, speaking only in calm voices, cutting deeper each time. And still Earth remained quiet. No grand speeches from leaders, no triumphant cries, only the silence of a people who had already lived through worse and knew they would live through this too. The Empire could not understand it. They could not stop it. And with every passing day, the silence shook the stars harder than any war had ever done before. The war stretched across months and then years, the Empire sending wave after wave of fleets into the dark, the humans answering each wave the same way, with silence, precise, calm actions, and a stillness that broke the hearts of every soldier who faced them, no matter how many ships were sent, no matter how many weapons were unleashed. The humans endured, never shouting, never raging. They moved like a quiet tide, rising higher and higher. The council sat in their grand chamber, their voices loud. With anger, their faces twisted with fear, one shouted. Humanity should have been crushed in days. Another roared, "We are the Empire. None can defy us yet." Deep inside, each of them was a truth they would not speak. The humans were winning, and they were winning without noise. The envoy stood at the edge of the chamber watching. He had tried again and again to warn them. He had sent report after report, telling them that the silence was more dangerous than any weapon, but they had not listened now. Their fleets lay shattered, their soldiers broken, their weapons silenced. He spoke only a few words now, his voice low. The galaxy is already changing. The silence has spread. The council turned on him, their anger fierce, but even their rage could not hide the fear in their eyes. On the front lines, the battles grew stranger. Human fleets no longer rushed to fight. They simply appeared where they were needed, cut through supply lines, disabled command ships, dismantled weapons, then disappeared again. The Empire fired wildly, their channels filled with screams, but the humans always answered with calm orders. One or two words, no more, and always silence after. It was like fighting shadows that whispered. In the capital of the Empire, whispers began to grow. The people who had always lived in fear now looked to the stars and asked questions. What if the humans are right? What if silence is stronger than fear? Graffiti appeared in the alleys of the great cities, single words painted in black silence. The symbol of rebellion had been born. The war reached its peak above the Empire's own borders. Human fleets had advanced farther than anyone thought possible. The Empire threw everything they had into the final defense, thousands upon thousands of ships, more than had ever been gathered in history. The sky above their worlds burned brighter than suns as fleets clashed. The Empire shouted their orders, their voices cracking with desperation. Humanity spoke few words. Steady, clear strike here. Now cut this line, then silence again. And with every calm order, another piece of the Empire fell. The envoy stood on the command deck of his ship, watching the battle unfold. His heart heavy, he whispered to himself, "This is the end, and it will not end. In fire, it will end in silence." On Earth, billions watched screens glowing with light from battles far away. Families sat together in silence. Children asked questions. Parents answered quietly. People worked in factories, spoke in whispers. Repaired. Machines without fuss, the whole world calm, the whole world patient, for they knew victory was coming, not because of rage, but because of stillness. The Empire's fleets fought to the last, ships exploding, tearing each other apart, commanders screaming into broken channels, but the humans pressed forward quiet and unstoppable. When the final command ship was taken, not a single cheer rose from Earth. No flags waved, no loud celebrations, only silence. The war was over, and silence had won. The council of the Empire met one last time. Their chamber cracked with their voices. Some demanded to fight to the very end. Others demanded surrender. Finally, they looked to the envoy, the only one who had seen the truth from the beginning. His face calm, his words simple: you cannot fight silence, you can only join it. His voice echoed through the chamber until even the lords fell quiet. Word spread quickly. The Empire had fallen, not with fire, not with rebellion, but with silence. Planets, once enslaved, stood free. Rebellions rose not with violence, but with calm refusal to obey. Systems stopped answering the commands of the council, their silence louder than any war cry. Across the galaxy, new banners rose, painted not with fire, but with the single symbol of silence. Humanity did not demand thrones. Humanity did not demand tribute. They only demanded peace in silence. And so worlds followed, not out of fear, but out of choice. They followed the silence that had broken the Empire. On Earth, leaders gathered once more deep underground in their quiet chambers, their voices low. We did not seek this war, yet we have ended it. What shall we do now? One asked another, answered with the same calm words: we will not rule. We will guide the silences. Enough! The envoy returned to his home, a man broken by the war, yet also changed. He walked through the streets of his world and saw the word silence painted on walls. He saw children playing without fear. For the first time he realized the humans had not conquered, they had freed, they had given the galaxy something it had forgotten: hope born from calm. In the skies above Earth, the last of the human fleets returned, ships battered but steady crews, speaking in whispers to one another, not cheering, not crying, only steady silence. The people welcomed them not with parades, but with quiet nods, hands raised in calm respect. The silence was their victory. The galaxy had changed forever. No longer would the Empire's noise rule, no longer would fear echo through the stars. The silence of humanity had shaken the galaxy harder than any war. Before it had toppled empires, it had freed worlds. It had written a new chapter, not in blood, but in stillness. And though the stars burned on in their endless fire, the silence remained stronger than war, stronger than fear, stronger than the Empire itself. It was the silence of Earth, the silence that had spread across every world, the silence that would echo forever through the stars.